Welcome to the Edelheit Experience, a compelling conversation about revolutionizing health and well-being, bringing you rich stories and lessons learned from leading corporate executives. Now, we'd like to introduce your host, Jonathan Edelheit.
I want to welcome everyone to the Edelheit Experience. I've got a great guest with us today, Greg Nussbickel. Greg, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Where are you joining us from today?
Beautiful, sunny Fort Myers, Florida.
How is it getting now that it's winter and all the snowbirds are coming down? Is it getting crazy?
We're getting the double whammy, the normal snowbirds, and then the people who've decided they just want to make Florida their 100% home because of the pandemic, and you can work from anywhere. So we're getting it from both sides.
It's a double whammy. I'm finding, because I'm here in Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, it's just taking me so much longer to get everywhere I want to go when I just want to get stuff done or get somewhere. And I remind myself, oh, it's the snowbirds and it's all the new people who moved down.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like we should get some special treatment because we're locals, but that hasn't happened yet.
We should have our own lane everywhere, right? A local lane.
Yeah, locals only. I like it.
That's right. I think we were onto something here. So, Greg, you have a firm, Nussbickel. Maybe you could, share a little bit of the background of what Nussbickel is focusing on.
Yeah, so I'm a solo practitioner. I've been a Florida lawyer for just about 20 years, and my practice now focuses a lot on the wills, trusts, and estates. My background started in litigation, though, so I was a business litigator to begin with, and I've done a lot of transactional business work and that kind of thing, and some tax law along the way. So that's been kind of the main focus for the recent past. And obviously, as we're going to talk about a little bit later, we've now kind of gone into a specialty of the payroll tax credits, most notably the employee retention tax credit that we'll get into.
Now, has the estate business, has it picked up during the pandemic? Because I know, once the pandemic was in full rage, my wife looked over at me and said, you better update our wills for our 9-month-old, who's now about 2. And, that became a priority of, pulling out the paperwork and sending it off to an estate attorney. So has that really picked up? And I'm just curious, what's your guidance to parents or just anyone who maybe even hasn't thought about that aspect, or maybe they did, but they just haven't taken action on it?
Yeah, it's one of those things that gets procrastinated almost all the time. A lot of milestones can go by before people really get into the office and put pen to paper on their wills and trusts and so forth. I think the pandemic caught a lot of people's attention and, made them think a little more seriously about their lives and their legacies and their families, the way that you mentioned. So we have seen more interest and a little more follow through than usual. And almost all of my clients, once they've gone through with it, feel relieved and empowered. And, it's so much less intimidating and scary than people think. So my advice is always just get the ball rolling, get it done. You can always change it in the future, but you'll be happy you did.
Is it, for some people, is it like a fear of thinking of death that keeps them from actually doing it? I know, like with my wife, with her, and I'm not saying this is the case with my in-laws, but with my in-laws, I know during the pandemic, my, wife had reached out and said, hey, you really got to update, your will, in case, we've got to take care of, this person or this person. And, and she's an attorney too. So she knows kind of the chaos. If somebody doesn't have their affairs in order, having to deal with the court systems and everything and the length of period of time to kind of unwind all that. Is why do you think that people don't have that stuff in order?
I think what you mentioned is a big part of it. So these are, not the most pleasant scenarios to be considering. So death, obviously, or incapacity, a predeceasing child, a loved one who needs a nursing home. All of these things are not the most popular concepts to be thinking about all the time. I think there's other parts of it too. I think there's a fear that the cost of doing proper planning is going to be exorbitant, which usually isn't as bad as people think. And then we're just busy in our everyday scenarios, and it can be hard to get to a law office, especially with a spouse if you're married, and get together and make all these decisions and follow through. So in our practice, we try to cut through a lot of that. We try to make it really efficient. We try to make it, time and cost effective, and, simplify some of these things. There's a lot of misinformation out there as well, which I think makes people hesitate and they kind of throw their hands up. But, once you have a basic idea of where you're trying to go, we can get you there without a big problem.
I would assume the cost of not doing it would be substantially higher after it happens, having to hire attorneys and go to court than it would be just to tighten it up in the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Stitch in time saves nine for sure. And, there's so many unintended consequences for not planning, and financial is just one of them, whether it be tax or, distributions going places you didn't want or expect, or those distributions being leaned or lost out to creditors and claimants and so forth. But there's also the emotional cost that goes with that. If you're in kind of a difficult situation, you've lost a loved one, and tensions are already running pretty high in the family, the last thing you need is a probate and a year's worth of wrangling and fighting and problems to go with it. It can really stress out a family unit. And I've seen some really bad results, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've had some friends who've had to go through that and just it was a very painful experience for them because everything wasn't done up front. And I'm one of those people. I have a living will, so I know that my wife has permission to pull the plug if I'm incapacitated in the hospital versus having to live with me 10 years in a coma or something like that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so although a small part of me thinks maybe in year 9 I'd come back, but you never know. And that's what the living will is for.
Mhm.
But now that we've talked about death and living wills and estates, the real reason that I brought you on was to talk about the employer retention tax credit. And, my understanding from all of this is there's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars sitting on the table for companies to get that's actually theirs. And a lot of them aren't necessarily paying attention or claiming it because they maybe think it's too good to be true, or it's a scam, or they don't qualify. Share with us, what is this whole ERTC thing, and why isn't it like the most sexy thing since Justin Timberlake came back with his songs?
Yeah, great intro there. It is really sexy, and it has an enormous potential benefit for the vast majority of businesses out there. And just to give a little background, a little history on it, the ERTC, was here early last year when the pandemic hit, and Congress was scrambling to try to come up with some legislation that would help and keep our economy from crashing out. But most of the listeners are going to be much more familiar with the PPP. And part of that reason is because those two programs were mutually exclusive at the time. So when the CARES Act came out, it was kind of a one or the other situation. The PPP was much more attractive, and so the ERTC was barely used. And we all just kind of went along with our lives and made those claims. And I think that was an unpleasant experience a lot of times, but certainly beneficial for many businesses. And later on in the year, Congress saw that their employee retention tax credit program was not being utilized. So they went back to the drawing board, and ARPA came out. And part of that legislation was to do a number of really important changes and upgrades and expansions of the law. And one of those is that now you can have both the PPP and the ERTC. So they are no longer mutually exclusive. They also made that retroactively effective. So a business here now today can get the maximum amount of ERTC for last year. And they also expanded it now into what's currently 3/4 of this year, as far as the benefits for all of that. So that was one big part of it, is expanding the reach of this claim, and the amount of businesses that are able to take advantage. So you can have larger businesses now that can take advantage for a longer period of time, and there's more money on the table, much more than there was to begin with. It actually maxes out now at $26,000 per employee that a business can recover as a tax refund.
So if I have 10 employees, I can potentially get $260,000. And if I had 100 employees, 2.6 million.
That's right. Yep. So that would be the maximum, and then we'll get into some of the things that you would kind of harmonize with all of that. But that should get anybody's attention that money is waiting to be refunded potentially to companies, and most just have not taken advantage.
So for those still out there, listening and saying, wait, this is still too good to be true. I'm either not going to get this money or I'm going to get it and I'm going to have to give it back.
Mhm.
What do you say to that?
Yeah, so even more good news and more unbelievably good, perhaps, but this is not a loan. It does not have to be repaid or forgiven. It's really a grant that's measured by your payroll as a company. And that does seem overly generous, perhaps, and depending on your political affiliations, you might feel one way or the other. But the idea, I think, makes a lot of intuitive sense. Congress decided that it makes a whole lot more benefit for the country for companies to keep their employees on the payroll rather than to lay them off and have them end up on unemployment. And so, to incentivize and to reward companies that do that, they came up with this program. And, it, if it's taken advantage of, could make a lot of difference to making sure that the economy trucks along and that we have enough business moving forward. And that's really where it came from. And it's something that the administration has been really pretty aggressive about asking, even begging companies to take advantage of.
Now, what are the restrictions of what they can use the money for? Company retreat, add health insurance, benefits or well-being benefits, open new offices. Are there restrictions of how you can spend this money?
Nope, no restrictions at all, just a grant. So it doesn't have to be used for business expenses or payroll or anything else. It's just measured by those. So it's basically free money on the table.
So if I understand you're an avid skier, so if you're an avid skier, you can go to Vail and go on a ski vacation with bring everyone from the company.
Hmm. Yep. So you're essentially getting a refund for what you've overpaid in the past, and that's done through a 941X. It gets looked at the IRS, and then you just receive a check to be used as you may please.
Now, would you advise people to take that ski vacation to Vail or to use the
As
money
long as
more
they take
wisely?
me with them, then yes, absolutely.
I think that is a smart approach to have you by their side on that trip. Now, does it matter like if a company was super profitable versus had tremendous losses? Like, does that come into play? For those skeptics thinking, no, this still won't work for my scenario.
Yeah, it comes into play, but it is not exclusive to companies that were financially harmed through the pandemic. So there's two ways, either or, for a company to qualify for the ERTC. One of which is to show significant losses in gross receipts quarter on quarter versus the baseline year of 2019. So if everything was going along well in 2019 and then in 2020 you saw this big loss of revenue in the corresponding quarter, and that's 50% or more last year is our benchmark, then you're going to qualify for that quarter. So the wages that you've paid in that quarter are going to be in play. Last year, the benefits were up to 5,000 per employee. This year, it's another 21 that you can have on top of that. When you get to 2021, though, you only need to show a 20% loss in that gross revenue to get your foot in the door. So a lot more businesses are going to be able to show that. And it doesn't have to be related to the pandemic. It's just a monetary thing. So if that quarter or even a preceding quarter showed that dip, you're in business. But let's say none of that happened. Let's say you were able to pivot and your business was just doing gangbusters, never seen receipts and profits ever as good. Your company may still qualify for the ERTC and perhaps for the maximum amount if it was what we call partially suspended by a COVID order. And the partially suspended is important because I think a lot of companies, even some CPAs, feel like you have to be shut down and shuttered and out of business for this to really qualify. But it's a much more expansive and nuanced kind of an analysis. So your company may have just had to, socially distance for a period of time, or could only have a certain amount of customers on site, or could only send a certain amount of employees to a job site, for instance, out of office. any one of those things, or supply chain disruptions or that kind of thing, can qualify also. It's a little bit harder to quantify, but it does bring in a much larger swath of the business population.
You just, mentioned something about, the accountants, being wrong or being off, right? So I look at this as, one of my specialties is in healthcare. And if I need brain surgery, I'm going to the top neurosurgeon that there is. I'm not just going to go to any local doctor or someone my, general practitioner or my PCP recommends me to. I'm going to find the best. The same would go for knee or anything, just because it's just a fact. You go for the best, you have better outcomes, less complications, you recover faster, they stay on top of the best surgical practices, everything, where the local guy is just average. And you have more problems that come with going for that surgery. So when it comes to this, how important is it? And where are some of the accounting firms or payroll companies maybe going wrong or giving bad advice?
Yeah, it really is an ever evolving and somewhat complex analysis at every stage. And I think partly because the PPP was kind of difficult, we might say, for accountants, and they're a little gun shy about some of these laws, that they're not really up on all the current events. They're not really equipped to analyze all these things as well as possible. And the difference can be enormous. We have companies that come into our office that were told they didn't qualify for anything at all. And then lo and behold, they're entitled to millions and millions of dollars on the table. And it can just be because there's a misconception, a throwback from when the law was originally enacted, for instance, that they're still kind of holding on to and just not aware. And it makes sense. They're not payroll tax experts. They're income tax practitioners for the most part, and they're busy with their normal practice. And this is kind of a once in a lifetime situation. So they're not going to take all the time and effort to get up to speed. Our team, by contrast, have been experts in this field well before the pandemic ever came out. And some of our team members have published articles that are really quote unquote writing the book on the ERTC, and they're in contact with Treasury, and they work with the law firm that helped draw up these laws in the first place, and they're constantly getting guidance and so forth. So we really have the finger on the pulse for all of this. It's not something that I think a company or an outfit should just dip their toe in. I don't think that's really responsible. There are a fair amount of those companies out there now that are just kind of all of a sudden trying to pick up on this bandwagon, and some of these large payroll companies, for instance, are doing what I call kind of a TurboTax answer to all of this. They're just kind of taking numbers you give to them and crunching them through maybe an algorithm that they have and just spitting something out, but not something you can really be confident on, not something you'd want to rely on if there was ever an audit. So I think, it's really a place for experts and experts only.
In regards to the audit, is if I think there's a nuance that's super important for people. If your accountant helps you, or let's say your payroll company helps you in processing this, and then you get audited, can you really explain the distinction of having like a legal expert like yourself who's doing this and the audit comes versus the payroll or the accounting firm, so people understand the difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the payroll firm, especially, they can't give legal advice. They can't give tax advice, and they're very upfront about that. So all they're doing is their version of being a conduit, and putting money probably on an Excel spreadsheet or what have you, and then you're off on your own. If there's a problem, if it gets a second glance, then there's no one to rely on, and you certainly, if anyone's used TurboTax, I think understand that you kind of make some guesses along the way. You kind of hope for the best and so forth. So that may be the worst case scenario. Accountants and CPAs are certainly going to be able to give the tax advice, and they may again be experts in their own field. But time and time again, we see that there are misconceptions, missed opportunities, but also overreach that end up being a problem. And so your most important priority is to start with experts in the field because they're not going to make those mistakes in the first place. But then we'll also build up a deliverable that we can get to the IRS and rely on later. So if you get that letter 2-3 years down the road, we're going to have all kinds of data, all kinds of research, FAQs and private letter rulings and so forth to support each piece of the puzzle. And so then we just send that right back to the IRS and say, look, we've considered all of this. We know we're in the safe harbor, for instance, and don't worry. Versus, I think, some of the CPAs are going to be more out of their depth in that scenario.
So one thing I have to confess, kind of for those of our listeners who are a little bit older, I don't know if you remember the Rogaine commercials where the guy was like, "I'm president, but also a customer." Is we went through the ERTC with you guys, and I remember how that journey started, which was we spoke to our accounting firm. And our accounting firm said, we don't get involved in this at all. Go talk to the payroll company. And actually, if I wind it back a little bit, my buddy at Matt Williamson, Insurance Office of America, was like, hey, you got to talk, to Greg. These guys were doing amazing things with the ERTC and all this, revenue that can help companies get back, that they can invest in their healthcare, their well-being of their employees, keeping employees on. And I was that skeptic. I was like, no, this is too good to be true. This is BS. We're not going to qualify. All these different things. And then went to our accountant, and the accountant's answer was, I can't help you with this. Go talk to payroll. Of course, I thought that was crazy because I'm like, what the hell? You're our accountant. Like, how could you not be on top of this stuff? And especially if it's a pandemic and companies are getting crushed everywhere, like, how could you not be on top of something that helps get them back such a substantial amount of money and almost be disconnected, like don't care about it? That really blew my mind the most. And then I know we went and talked to the payroll company, and the payroll company was like, we can't help you, come back at another time. And then talk to you and, realized what this really was. And it's obviously the most important is having the expertise of that, what I call neurosurgeon on this, especially when you're dealing tax credits in the IRS. And, our company, I won't share the exact sum, but it's, it's in the six-figure range. It was, extremely meaningful for our company, and we're a smaller company. I was just amazed at how out of depth this is for most accountants and payroll companies, and I can't even fathom the bad advice that people are getting. Are you giving a lot of second opinions? And are there cases where you've saved companies millions of dollars from this?
Yeah. I mean, from a larger view here, probably 90+% of U.S. companies are entitled to some ERTC return. So you start there. And so usually when a company has been told they don't qualify, it's because of some misconception, some misinformation that they've had in the past. So I mean, just statistically, it's rare that a company's not entitled to something. We start with then looking at their gross receipts, and as I mentioned, it kind of seems simple. You say, okay, one quarter versus the other, do the math. Are you down 50% last year, down 20% this year? But even that has more to it. You can look to a prior quarter. You can even sometimes change your method of calculation. You can go from accrual versus cash and back and forth just for this purpose. And which wages are counted, how are they counted, how does it coordinate with the PPP? Because you can't double dip, but that doesn't mean that you can't still have your cake and eat it too, because there's more wages that you can use for all of that. So yeah, we've had notable examples where a restaurant with 20 something units that they had out there, locations, we're told straight out by their accountant that this was not for them. And then, turned around, they're going to get a $4 or $5 million credit out of all of this. And, it would really be a shame. And I think this is going to happen a lot, where some of these companies just, they're back in business. They're trying to keep their nose to the grindstone. They don't think this is for them, and it just doesn't pop on their radar screen. And then ultimately it's going to be too late. They've lost this opportunity, but their competition took advantage of it and now has this unfair advantage. And, we just don't want to see that happen. And that's part of why we'll pretty much talk to, any business owner that wants to chat about it. as long as they have at least 5 employees, we're happy to kind of discuss this, no obligation, go through some of the specifics, get some of the information ahead of time. And in a 15 or 20-minute phone call, we'll let you know where you stand, what you might be able to expect, some of the different aspects for it, and we try to make it as painless as possible.
When do these tax credits expire? Because you just mentioned that they'll, be busy and not pay attention and then won't be able to apply for them. Is a certain period of time you have to do it in?
Well, one thing that's kind of a newer development here is that the fourth quarter of this year is no longer part of the viable ERTC claim. So wages after September 30th are not counted, but that doesn't mean you can't still make a claim for really years to come. So it should be a couple of years at least, unless that gets changed again, where you can file the amended 941 and get that refund. But so much is in flux. In fact, those abilities to qualify may pop up again. That's actually part of the lobbying that's going on, and maybe in a reconciliation bill, we'll see the fourth quarter reappear. And we may see the first quarter of next year actually extended even that further now that we have Omicron. So, everything's up to the discretion of Congress, and that that's not always exercised in the most reasonable way. So, while the going's good, we really want to take advantage of these things. We don't want there to be guidance or something that makes it any harder in the future.
Are you able to this is a guess, and I know it's a lot to ask this, but the odds of this tax credit, them passing something or doing something where a year from now they say, hey, if you haven't applied for it, it's over?
It's always possible. Yep. Congress has, so long as it's constitutional, they can, as you know, pretty much do whatever they want. That could certainly be the case. I'd be surprised if it was kind of a gotcha moment, but shortening something like that, absolutely. Or, on the other side, extending the period for an audit, that's certainly on the table too.
What do you think the odds are of you're talking about potentially it being extended, fourth quarter or into next year? What do you think the chances of that actually happening? Because that would be a big win for companies also.
Yeah, it could really change the complexion. The infrastructure bill had the removal of this quarter from the ERTC as part of its provision. That's part of how that's being paid for. It wasn't very well thought out. I think, and again, members of our team actually talked with some of the Congress members and kind of informed them, and they were a little surprised and tried to get it put back in there. That obviously didn't happen, but there seems to be a fair amount of interest on the Hill about maybe kind of revamping this here. I couldn't give any Vegas betting line on it necessarily, but it's a real possibility. And I think with these new variants, it might be more front of mind and really make a lot of sense for Congress to go back and at least reinstate what it promised to begin with.
Well, maybe if we keep getting creative in the next variant's Megatron, then maybe they'll be more inclined to give us tax credits. What percentage of companies do you feel have actually moved forward with getting this tax credit?
A small portion. I think the most credible estimates now, even if you're counting some of the cookie cutter efforts through the payroll companies and things like that, is maybe a third, maybe less than that, have really taken advantage of it. And again, if you think 90% of businesses out there are entitled to something, then that really leaves a lot of room. And there is more and more, I think, understanding and interest and acceptance of all of this, but there's a long way to go.
So if you're not a president, a CFO, and you're listening to this, you might think, well, this is above my pay grade, or I don't get involved in tax credits. I'm uncomfortable with this. But in reality, Greg, I mean, they should take this and go share it with their CFO, their CEO, and say, hey, have you done this? And if not, here's a great organization and law firm to do it with, right? I mean, I would think that, if I found this out through a friend and colleague of mine, but if one of my employees had brought this to me, I would be so grateful for them bringing this to my attention and giving me the expertise to go back and get a couple $100,000 or a couple $1 million.
and be the hero, right? And
Yeah.
I'd be shouting it from the rooftops. I have been, almost
Employee of the year.
for it's been what, 9 months now since I've been involved, since this really took shape, and I had the same reaction that you did when this began. I thought it sounded too good to be true, and that there must be some catch, and it actually only expanded from there. In what's covered, and how much, and for how long, and which companies qualify, and which wages, and all of that has just been almost overwhelmingly positive. That yeah, anyone could bring it to the attention of the owner or the C-level executive, and be the savior of the company. Maybe a lot of companies really need these funds to get by, or to get back to where they were. And we also try to make it a very non-intimidating kind of process. So I know we're all busy. I'm a business owner myself with my firm, and I get it. We're all trying to hustle and serve our clients and do our jobs. But as I mentioned earlier, we're talking maybe a 15, 20-minute phone call. I have an online intake form that I've kind of tailored to give us a good snapshot of what we need without you having to go back to all these records in the past. And if you have those, wonderful, but you should probably know the answers to most of the questions that I would need in our initial consultation right off the top of your head. You schedule a phone or Zoom with me or one of my partners, and automatically you're on the calendar. It's very pain-free. There's no obligation. We work on a completely contingency fee basis to begin with, so there's really no risk. And when it comes down to it, and we've studied your case, and we bring to your attention what you might be entitled to, then the decision's up to you. Do you want to just take the credits that are 100% clear and there's absolutely no doubt, or if these things are still more likely than not? We really take our cues from you. You're totally in control the whole way, so there really is no downside.
Got it. And contingency based, meaning you only take a percentage of what they're going to get back. You're not charging anything up front.
Yeah, that's right. And if for whatever reason they don't get the refund, then we don't get any.
Okay. So if they want kind of a half-assed approach, go to their normal accountant, go to their payroll company. If they want the top neurosurgeon, go to you guys, right?
Yeah, and it really can be half sometimes. We've really seen that, where really half of the equation is being totally ignored, either because that practitioner is unaware of that whole partial suspension analysis, for instance, or they just don't want to get involved in it. They're not comfortable, so they have their head in the sand. So it really works out better working with us, even from just a financial standpoint, not to mention a safety and efficiency standpoint as well.
Is there an easy website or domain that you can share with our viewers?
Yeah, they can go directly to my website that I set up for this. So it's ERTCnow.com. And so that has some frequently asked questions, a little bit of information on the program, about the team that you'd be working with. You'll see the credentials of some of these folks. Be, I think, really impressed. I'm really impressed with them. Former Big Four execs, and really, really well educated and experienced people that are taking the helm on these things. And there's also a link in there either to set an appointment with me if you'd like, or what we prefer is to go ahead and fill out that online intake form. It's a secure portal. You can upload things if you'd like. Give us a snapshot, give us your contact information, press submit. It's going to come right into my radar screen personally. I'm going to look through it all, and then I'll move forward, and I'll shoot you straight. If we're talking about it and I don't really think there's a great opportunity, it's in both of our interests to not waste anyone's time. But again, in most of the cases, it's going to be well worth it, and we can get you moving down that pike really efficiently, as quickly as possible. There's a lot of backlogs with the IRS. We're on top of that, but we've got to live with that. But the light at the end of the tunnel is there, and it can be huge.
That's awesome. So, and I think it's a very easy website to remember. ERTCnow.com. You were definitely out in front in getting that. So I really want to thank you, Greg, for joining us for the Edelheit experience. I hope this really brings some value and brings some cash home for businesses that either can move forward with it before the end of the year or in the beginning of the year.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Greg.
Okay, really appreciate you having me on.
It's our pleasure.